Perfect. Okay. So this is a recording of coding as a career. We are meeting today with Mr. Brad Twining. So he actually is Mr. Twining's brother. And he's going to talk to us about, he's actually not a coder, but he has done a lot of stuff with computer science. He works in information technology. And so he's going to talk a little bit about his experience with coding and his experience with IT and kind of what you can expect. Brad, you got the worksheet there working on, right? You get a copy of that?
I did get a copy that you sent to me, but I barely looked at it. So hopefully I'll cover enough for them to be able to fill out their papers.
All right. Well, they'll ask questions if they have any, and if you miss something, they'll definitely let you know.
I just pulled it up. I'll use it as a cheat sheet. So as Mr. Twining mentioned, I am Brad Twining, his younger brother, though not by choice. I I have been in the technology field ever since I graduated college in 2011, so almost 10 years, mostly in a form of technology called consulting. So consulting basically means is that I work with different companies and help them and consult with them on their technology needs. A lot of times that ends up being coding and developing applications and building software, but sometimes it can be much more strategic. How can they position their organization better in their field, whether it's I'm working with a healthcare provider, how can we ramp them up to make them better and more suited to handle everything happening in the world, especially with, as pertinent as healthcare is right now, or if it's a credit provider or a bank and all of these different industries and helping them uh, figure out ways that they can improve their business. So a lot of times that means I have done a lot of coding, I've done a lot of programming. Um, I started off kind of in that programming mindset. And as I grew in my career, I gradually became more of a manager than an actual coder. But I still kind of try to keep up with the technologies and keep up with, current things that are happening in different languages and up and coming, exciting technology things that are out there. So I did go. I'm going back to my checklist to make sure that I hit everything before you guys start asking questions. I went to BYU, graduated in 2011 in information technology with a computer science minor, which was pretty easy considering the overlap between those two fields. But I um, did really enjoy it. I was in school, trying to think exactly how many years because I took a little 2-year hiatus there, as many of you may be familiar with, as well as an extra year off to get married. So I think my total years in college were 6 uh, of actual study years, but it took me a little bit to settle on my major. And then once I found my major, it took about 3 to 4 years beyond that. But so I'm trying to think of some of the interesting things that I have done that might be of interest to you guys. So I'm trying to think. Is this middle school or high school, Kurt? I totally forget.
So this is 6th and 7th graders. So
Okay.
11, 12, 13-year-olds.
Okay. So I worked with a company that helped provide credit alerts to people, right? So maybe if your parents went and they opened up a credit card, they can get an alert on their phone saying, "Hey, someone opened up a credit card in your name," and they can get it within 15 minutes of them applying for that credit card. And people use that as identity protection to stop other people from opening up credit cards in their name. So I helped a company figure out a way to get these alerts as real time as possible. So once a person opened up a card, that request went to this bank, which then went to this bank, which then came to us. And then we had to figure out what data we had, what data we needed. Then we sent that off to another company and was part of this flow to get from applying to a credit card to getting an alert on your phone in 5 minutes or 15 minutes, very, very real time. That was one of the big things that I helped a company with. I helped them pick up after a data breach, right? We all have heard in the news of hackers and people coming in and stealing data. Well, what happens when a company gets their data stolen? What steps can they take to prevent that from happening in the future? And how do we kind of pick up the pieces after something like that happens? And that's another thing that I helped my company with, working through. So I do realize I didn't even say I worked for a company called Pariveda Solutions. They're up there. That's our logo for the Philadelphia office, which is where I am currently located. And this right here is Gritty, who is the mascot for the Philadelphia, I believe, 76ers, if I remember correctly. No, Flyers, Philadelphia Flyers. See, that's how great I am as a Philadelphia resident. And so Pariveda Solutions has about 600 to 700 people across the U.S. in about 10 to 11 of the major cities. So Dallas, Houston, San Francisco, LA. We don't have any in Salt Lake. I guess they haven't considered that as a possible place yet, but we do recruit a lot out of BYU because, BYU people tend to go all over the world, all over the nation, not necessarily just in Utah. Ooh, okay, so that was a lot that I kind of went over. So I'll go ahead and see if anyone has any questions, if I missed something on the checklist.
Everybody still there? Guys, any questions? Oh, here we
I
go.
have a question. So you said that you went to school for like 6 years. What's like the minimum to like get like the job that you have?
So that's a great question. What's interesting about technology in general is, yes, a degree definitely helps because it gets you a lot of the knowledge that you need right up front, and you learn a lot of the critical thinking, which is the main thing about being in technology. You can learn how to program a specific language. You can learn how to program Java or JavaScript or C++ or any of these number things. But the core of being a good technologist or someone good in technology is that problem solving ability and critical thinking. So you go to college for 4 years and you learn a lot of that critical thinking, a lot of that problem solving, and maybe you learn how to program a language or two, right? If you take computer science, maybe you learn Java. If you take something else, you learn, a different language. But at the end of the day, the difference between languages is just syntax. Do I put a semicolon at the end? Do I put a period here? How do I phrase it? But the core concepts of programming are things that you can take with you and learn different languages. So in school, it's actually not even required to have a college degree in order to be a successful computer programmer or technology person, because you can learn. I mean, there's 20 sites out there that you can go to and learn how to code and learn how to, code specific languages and get, all of that knowledge. It's not even necessarily required for you to get a degree. It's helpful because it shows that you're willing to put forth the work, that you're willing to have that critical thinking, and you do gain a lot of that. But you could theoretically learn something in high school and then start right away after high school. It might be a little harder, but in general, a 4-year college degree will go a long way with starting off ahead of the curve and ahead of the game. Hopefully that answered your question, Braxton.
Yeah, that helped. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Brad, what about some of these skills that are listed there? Are there any that you don't really use, or are they kind of all really necessary? The taking responsibility, keeping things organized, managing time, speaking, writing, listening. If I'm gonna go into coding, do I really need to be able to speak in front of people? Do I have to really listen to people? Can I just do my thing and be in my cubicle and hold up and not have to worry about people?
Which that's an absolute possibility. I know plenty of really good coders and really good programmers that don't have any people skills. They don't like to talk to people. They don't like to write or explain things. They just want to be given a task and they go and they do their task. And there's a very large spectrum of where you can be when it comes to programming, when it comes to technology. So if you want to be, I want to work with computers, I don't want to talk to anybody, I want it to be fed to me underneath of the door so I don't even have to see anybody, and I want to stay in my man cave or lady lair and just code like crazy and have nobody talk to me. That's an absolute possibility. And there are people out there that are very successful and get paid great for doing something like that. At the same time, if you feel like you have a little more people skills, you want to actually talk to the client, to the customer, ask questions and have that listening and be able to explain things with, explain difficult concepts to people that might not have that technology edge or the technical edge. That's a very highly regarded skill as well. And that's kind of this consulting realm that I ended up going down. It's that kind of mixture between, well, let me work with the business and I actually talk with some of these people, but let me also work with the programmers and the people writing it and the extremely technical people. And it's kind of that middle ground between the two. And then if you can choose to go, well, I don't care about math or I don't care about programming, but I like the business aspect. I liked understanding, the organizing materials, the responsibility, but maybe I don't want to do all the technical stuff. There's plenty in this large spectrum as well for that path as well. But for specifically what I do, I would say all of these things are extremely needed. I have to be able to listen when I'm talking to a client and listen to not only what they say they want, but be able to figure out what they need. Because sometimes they'll say they want something, they don't really need something. They'll say, I want a Ferrari. I want a Ferrari to drive down the street and get me from point A to point B. And I have to look at them and say, do you really need a Ferrari? If all you're doing is going between point A and point B, could you get there with a razor with an electric scooter? Do we have to spend $100,000 on a Ferrari when you can do the exact same thing with a scooter? What about a bus ticket? Can I get you a bus ticket? That's only $250. I can save you so. And so trying to work through and figure out exactly what they need versus what they want. I have to have the speaking to be able to talk with them and present my solutions or present my ideas. The writing, the reading, assertiveness, organizing, all of those things are definitely necessary for what I do. But again, it's kind of like a menu, right? If you want to pick and say, okay, I want to work with a team, win mathematics with listening and writing, boom, there's a path there for you.
So how have things changed? I mean, over this past year, I'm sure things have changed quite a bit, but from point A 10 years ago, 2011, you're out of college, you get your first job to today, 2021. How's it different?
What's interesting is kind of as I mentioned before, there's there's obviously new technologies and new languages that come along, and those are always different and new. There's some that kind of have been around for forever that are going to be around for a long time. You've got your Javas, you've got your Microsoft C#, which is going to be there for a long time. There's all these new, specifically web languages and web technologies that are coming around. You've got React JavaScript. You're going to have JavaScript itself, or Angular, or all of these other new type of ways of doing things. And at the core of it, what hasn't really changed that much. The idea of what they call object-oriented programming, which is a way to program in certain languages, the cores don't really change. The idea of problem solving doesn't really change, and being able to think through a solution or an algorithm hasn't really changed. The way that you present it has drastically changed in 10 years, especially with the introduction of the cloud. And I mean, I'm sure maybe everyone's heard of Amazon Web Services, AWS, or Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud. There's all of these different varieties of cloud services now that provide their own huge laundry list of things that they do, and trying to stay on top of all the new technologies is fun for me, and it's why I chose consulting in general, as opposed to, well, let me be a programmer and do really good with one thing but not really care about anything else.
Guys, got any questions?
Clark, I see your hand.
So what is the most interesting part of your job?
I think for me, the most interesting part is, again, being able to solve those complicated problems and be able to explain it to someone that might not have the technical skill set. So when I talk about, like, think of it almost as if you had to figure out uh, what's a what instructions, what's an algorithm that a traffic light has to take, what's the best way, what's the most efficient way for a traffic light to work. How many times have you guys pulled up, or I mean, well, I guess in the passenger seat, but you're in a car and the light doesn't turn green, and you're like, why doesn't the light turn green? Why? I mean, no one else is going, right? Like, why is it not going green? And you can think through and be like, all right, well, what would be a way to make that better? And being able to look at the world around us and say, I see a problem here. Let me try to make it better, and using technology. So, for instance, I don't know if you guys saw in the news, but there was I think it was in New York, but there was a vaccine registration system
I heard about
that
this.
some county put in place, and it was horrible. It was slow. It would take forever. The forms wouldn't load. It would time out. And this guy was just like, I'm tired of this. There's got to be a better way to do this. And he sat down on a weekend and he wrote a way to, he wrote a new site and gave it to the county and said, hey, I rewrote this for you this weekend because it was horrible before. So I'm going to do this and kind of to help improve the world around you. So what I enjoy is trying to find those things. Um, Usually it's at a client and someone that's paying me money for, but in general it's going around and saying, hey, I'm at this elevator, why is it taking so long? Isn't there a better way that I can solve this? And thinking through, using that critical thinking, how would I program an elevator to as efficiently as possible to improve my life? Or how would I improve this website, or this idea that I have, how could I make it come to pass?
Anything you don't like about your job?
So a lot of times I'm with, and kind of the nature of my job and jobs in general is it's not always amazing and wonderful. As much as I would like to always be on a project that just like wakes me up and gets me going, and like, yeah, I'm gonna change the world. I'm gonna fix this problem and everyone's gonna know about it. A lot of times I'm on a client where I'm working on a project that has such small impact to the greater society, and it's not as sleek, it's not as new. Maybe they're using a technology that has been around for 30 years and no one uses anymore, but they do. So we've got to do what they use. Even though we try to suggest new things, they're like, no, nope, nope, we got to stick with the old. So sometimes my job requires me to do stuff that I think is kind of boring, where it's like, oh, well, this isn't really that exciting. This isn't the reason that I joined, whether it's this company or joined this career path. But sometimes you kind of got to go through those boring times to really appreciate the exciting things that I get, and the things that kind of really get me going and get me driving and make me happy that I chose this path. Sometimes I got to go through the mud to enjoy the dry ground.
Anybody else?
Do you usually have like one main thing that you do every day, or do you like to do a variety of things?
So Braxton, that's a great question. And usually, so the way that consulting kind of works and the way that my company works is like I'll get staffed and they'll say, all right, you're going to work with this other company for 3 months. And here's your project and here's what you're going to do. And so for those 3 months, 9 to 5, 8 to 4, whenever I tend to work, that's pretty much what I focus on the majority of my time. And then at the end of that kind of contract, and they're like, all right, well, if we don't quite have anything for you to work on right now, but we've got something coming up. They couldn't time it just right where I start immediately. I'll have a period where I'm not, working directly with another company. And during those times, I get to kind of pick and choose what I want to do. So I get to go and learn new technologies and learn new things and study this or kind of work on this little pet side project. I'm going to build this bot that posts a movie quote every day to a social media thing for me and my friends to kind of play and kind of guess around with. So I have time for these little random pet projects. And those times I try to kind of do multiple things. I think if I'm focusing on one thing for too long, it can kind of get old. It can kind of get not necessarily boring, but just kind of tedious. And so being able to kind of bounce it around and change it up is beneficial. And a lot of times, even when I'm on my clients for those 4 months at a time, and I'm working 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, and I'm doing, one specific thing, even then I try to break it up. Sometimes I'll have some meetings in the morning with the client to talk through a couple concerns that they have, and then I'll take a little bit where maybe I'll do a little more technical hands-on coding with something, and then I'll do a little bit where I'm coaching someone else and helping them get through their problems, and try to like break it up a little bit, just because doing the same thing constantly would kind of drive me crazy. And that's one of the reasons that I decided not to be strictly a programmer, because that's what you're doing versus being able to kind of do different things.
When you work with a client, is it just you, or do they assign like a team to work with the client?
So we definitely like to have teams. It makes it easier for us to be able to have someone within our company to work with that we know, and that can also kind of work together and coach each other. So we're very focused on getting better, not only making myself get better throughout my career, but making sure that those around me improve and grow and progress in their careers. So by working with other people within Pariveda, gives us a chance to coach each other, to mentor each other, and kind of have that outlet where we're not with the client and we can kind of let loose and kind of talk about some things and work through problems that we're having together. They definitely prefer to be team based, and specifically, so a lot of consulting firms, um, some of the big ones that you might hear are like Deloitte or PwC or Anderson. Some of these big, they call them the big four consulting firms, they'll staff people wherever they want. You live in Philadelphia, that's great. You're going to be working in Denver for the next 6 months, and you're going to fly out there at least every other week for 6 months, and you're going to have to live with it, and you're going to have to fly and travel. So my company prefers a local based model. So most of Philadelphia stays within Philadelphia, working on Philadelphia clients. Most of Dallas stays in Dallas and they work on Dallas clients. So that way we're not traveling a lot and having to kind of be on the road, be away from our families, living in hotels. All of that stuff sounds really cool for like 2 months, and then you just want to quit and you don't want to do it anymore because it's not really the best lifestyle. But so because of that, because we have this local model, I get to know all the people in Philadelphia really, really well, because we all work together. We all work on similar projects. We'll bounce around and be together on a project. And then we go and we're on something different. Then we come back together and we can see how much, oh, you learned this and you've grown and you've done this. And it's pretty exciting to be able to work with a team locally and get to know everybody on the team. And there's only about 15 of us here in Philadelphia, so it makes it a real close family.
Tyson's got a question.
Go for it, Tyson.
Do you have to pay for when you go flying? If you're trying to get to Philadelphia, do you have to pay for your flight?
So a lot of times when I'm on a client, so for instance, before COVID hit, just around this time last year in March, I had a client and they were in Boise, Idaho, and I didn't have to go out there all the time, which was great. But they wanted me to come out about once every 3 months, just to kind of see how things are going and meet with the team. And it was my first trip, and it was actually because they're paying us and they wanted us to come, the client paid for my flights and paid for my hotel and paid for my food, so I didn't have to pay anything, which is great. And then I actually made it so I had a long layover in Salt Lake so I could stay and see my brother and his family. So I got to come out, stayed for a couple days, saw his family, goofed off. I saw some friends of mine from college. I went down to BYU, all the fun. I went to the creamery and had all the wonderful things in Utah. And then I went to Boise and had my client, and I didn't have to pay for any of it. And I only had to pay for my rental car because it was a personal trip. But when I'm at the client, they pay for everything, which is really nice. And that's a good perk of consulting, is I don't have to pay for my travel. I get to travel, I get to stay in hotels, I get to see new places, but I don't have to pay for it. It's just if you have to do it all the time, it gets really old.
Okay, that answers my question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
How do they keep consistency if you're constantly being moved from one project to another, working with a client? How does that client end up having consistency throughout a couple of years?
Well, so ideally, what makes our job successful is if we're able to not only provide something to our client, but also help them and build them up. So for us, it's not, we try not to say, all right, we're going to come in here, we're going to build something, and we're just going to throw it over the fence and hope you can figure it out. We like to get very kind of work side by side with the people of that hire us, and coach them and teach them the best practices, teach them the best way to do things, the best way to code, the best way to manage this application. So that way, when we leave, they have all the knowledge that we had, and then they can be successful without us there. It's almost like, in our eyes, we try to work ourselves out of a job. So a company says, hey, I'm having problems, I want to hire you. Great. We come in and we teach them everything we can. So that way, when we leave, they can be successful and they don't need us for that project. Hopefully they see how good we are and they say, you did great with this thing, come help us with this thing over here. And then we'll come and help them with that thing over there. But we try to make sure that they have everything they need to be successful, so that when we leave, they're not dependent or reliant on us for too much.
Cool. Anybody else?
If I were to want to go into this job, how much should I expect to make? Because I don't know.
That is a very good question. And I think in general, when you get into technology, when you get into programming, because it's such a high demand job, people are always wanting, talented individuals. You can make really, really good money with it. And you can look online. There's actually a site that I use a lot when I'm looking around at jobs, called Glassdoor. And what it is people will go on and they will post their salaries and say, hey, I am an architect at Microsoft and this is how much I make. Or I'm a programmer at Facebook and this is how much I make. And you can go and look and say, okay, if I go to Facebook and here's my job title, what's the range that I can expect? And you can get anywhere from 50 to 60 to 100 to 150 to $200,000 a year by looking at some of these companies and some of these positions, and you can say, oh, that's great. And obviously, the longer you stay with it, the more potential there is for your salary to increase. But even entry level being right out of college, you don't have any work experience, but you have your education, you can easily make, and I believe more than you can make in many other entry level uh, positions like journalism um, or education, or even maybe not healthcare, because healthcare you got to do a lot more school for. But when you look at a 4-year degree, you can come out making a pretty good penny. It's actually a lot of fun to just go and search around Glassdoor and be like, hey, if I'm at Amazon and I'm a web programmer, how much can I make? And you're like, oh wow, that's a lot. And you have to take into account you got to live in California, in the super expensive place in California. Maybe your driving time to work is 3 hours or something like this. So there's a lot of other factors beyond just your salary that you got to look at. But it's still pretty interesting. It's fun to dream when I look at some of those salaries. I'm like, that would be nice. Yes. Senia, is that right?
Yeah, so what made you want to go into coding? Like as a job?
So as probably Mr. Twining can relate to, growing up, our father was really big into computers. And so you think now, like all of you guys probably have a computer at home, or you have cell phones, or you have all this technology. But when we were growing up in the mid to early 1990s, it wasn't around that much. But our dad was really big on computers, and he had one of the first computers that I remember, like my friends having. It was this giant thing that sat on our desk with the monitor that took up the whole desk, and this giant thing on the floor. And it didn't have, it was before, it was really even before Windows. And the only way you interacted was through this little black command prompt called MS-DOS. And my dad would encourage us to learn how to use a computer. And I was 10, 9, 10, 11 years old, taking these little learning modules on this giant old computer on how to use a spreadsheet, how to use a word processor, which was unheard of. I wrote a book report in 6th grade on a computer and printed it because my handwriting was so bad and I was ashamed of it. And I was the only person in my entire class that submitted a printed off book report. Everybody else hand wrote it because no one else had that computer. But I grew up learning these things, learning how to spreadsheet. In middle school in 7th grade, I took the computer class and I just excelled at it. And the teacher would do his normal lecture, but he knew that I was ahead of everyone else. So he said, just go in the bin and take the next lesson out and just go and just do it on your own, like on your own pace. And I went through like 3 years worth of computer programming courses in 7th grade, doing spreadsheets and doing databases, doing all this other extra stuff that no one else was getting to because it just clicked with me. So growing up, I kind of had that drive and I knew I wanted to get into computers. By the time I got to college, there were so many different options, right? You can learn how to build computers in electrical and computer engineering, and you can actually build the resistors and the gates and the motherboards and figure out all of that. Or you can program and build software, or you can, um, administer a computer system. You can be a systems administrator, or you can get into networking. And there was all of these different things. And it took me a little bit of time to find what variety I wanted. I took the intro to computer engineering and I said, I don't like computers that much. It was really, really detailed. So then I went over to programming. Oh, maybe I don't like just program. And it took me a little bit to find that right variety of overlap of business and computers and administration. And that's kind of where I ended up. So Elise, I could not hear that question. Mr. Twining, could you repeat it? Because I couldn't hear it.
Yeah, she said she took a coding course and it was kind of confusing, and it was a little difficult for her to kind of go along with. So she was wondering if the more you do it, does it get easier? Is it um, you get used to it, I guess. The thinking of computer programming.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think similar to a lot of other things you can do in life, it's kind of like a muscle, right? When you first go and you first start working out and you're doing like a bench press, the next day you're sore. You're like, I never want to do that again. I never want to go and push any weights up because this is miserable. But the more you do it, it's counterintuitive. The more you do it, the less your muscles hurt. You're like, wait, what is this? How could, like, they're not sore anymore after a few days, and you can keep going, and then you can build your strength. And it can be very similar with this. If it's difficult for your brain to kind of think in that way and kind of work through the algorithms or work through the concepts of computer programming, the more you work on it and the more you practice it and the more you study it, just like weightlifting or playing an instrument or any of the other things that you can do, you'll gradually get better at it, and hopefully you might even like it more. When I was in college and I had to actually sit down and program, when I wasn't at the keyboard typing it out, I dreaded it. I did not want to do it. You can ask Mr. Twining because we took a computer science course together, and he would finish his assignments exactly when they were due because he was a diligent student and I wasn't. And he would finish it right on time, and he would get great grades. And I just wouldn't do it. I'd be like, I don't want to program. I don't want to program until the very end. And I had to stay up all night and do 5 different assignments because I had procrastinated to the very end. And when I was actually doing it, I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. I like this. This is great. But when I wasn't in front of my computer, I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to touch it. But as I did it more and as I did it more, I realized, oh, okay, this isn't that bad. This is pretty fun. Let me figure out how to solve this problem. And I got pretty good. And me and him took a course together during my freshman year when I didn't know any better. And then by my senior year, I'd like to think that I was a lot better student and more interested in programming and in computers than I was when I was a freshman.
Yeah, we won't talk about the calculus course we took together. Any other questions, guys? Right, we don't have to get wrapped up right now, but we got a few minutes and I need to talk to them about some other things we've been working on. But thank you, Brad, for taking the time to be with us today. And I'm guessing you're done for work for the day, right?
I actually have, so I am, yeah, so it's 4:30 for me now. Normally I would be done, but I have a couple more things to do. And I have a community service meeting this afternoon in about an hour that I'll be a little late for, but normally I'd be done by now.
Oh, and I guess before you go then, what about hours then? Do you normally just keep 8 to 5 or 8 to 4, 9 to 5? How do you balance saying I'm in the middle of this big project and I need to eat. I need to go home. How does that work?
So yeah, I think that's a great question. COVID has changed a lot of that because my commute is literally, well, the reason I have a background up is because my bed is right behind me and I'm literally in my bedroom. My company is completely remote and has been since about March 14th or 15th of last year. With, I don't know if we have an end in sight. I might get back to the office in September. Who knows? But yeah, normally it depends on the client that you're working with. So right now, my client is actually based in Houston. So because that's Central Time, and a lot of the people that I'm working with are Central Time, my hours are a little off, right? Normally, I would try to work from 8 or 9 until 4 to 5, But with them being in Houston, a lot of my meetings don't really get started until 10 o'clock. And so I generally go 10 to 5 or 10 to 6. And it kind of ebbs and flows sometimes. And when I have a big project, sometimes I'm working more. Sometimes I'm working more than our average of 40 hours a week. Sometimes I'm putting in 45 or 50 or more than that, depending on what the most important thing is that I've got going on. And sometimes I'm right around 40, sometimes even less, depending on what's going on. So it kind of gives and takes.
Awesome. All right. Well, are you okay if I've recorded this and I was planning on posting it on YouTube for other classes who didn't necessarily make it. You okay with me posting that?
Absolutely. I just took some training today about confidentiality, and I don't think I've shared anything that I'm not supposed to. So I think we're good.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me. I hope I was able to answer y'all's questions, and hope to see some of you guys in future class of 20. I can't do math right now. 27? Is that this class year? 6 years from now?
When do you guys graduate?
No one knows? That works. 2027, 2028.
2026. Yeah.
We'll see you then.
Okay, thanks again, Brad.
Yep, no problem.